We got the new KEFINE QUATIO today, and if you are a metalhead or listen to a lot of rock, punk, bands, or hip hop, then this is the set for you. The Quatio's overall sound is balanced, slightly warm and bassy, and it's basically a less bassy and more balanced version of the DOSCINCOs for $100 less. So for those who like the DOSCINCOs but maybe wanted a cleaner bass shelf, something more balanced, then this is what the Quatios are for cheaper. And if you're coming from the Clean or the DELCI, then the Quatio is the direct upgrade towards those. Similar sound with the black filter, but it's just more technical and more refined overall. The cut in the upper mids makes it very suitable for metal and rock, which does have a lot of energy when it comes to electric guitars, these cymbals that can often get too shouty. The black filter or nozzle is what I recommend for those genres, as the extra bit of low end really brings that energy to the drums and momentum in the rhythmic section. Very engaging. The slam is satisfying, it's more mid bass over sub bass, and the drums have a heavier hit without bleeding too much into the mids and the vocals. Now the black filter isn't the most balanced and cleanest sounding, but the extra bit of coloration is tastefully done and doesn't make the tonality overly husky. It strikes a great balance of speed, attack, and note wave when it comes to the low end. The upper mids cut also helps tame the shoutiness that many dislike with targets like Harman 2019. The vocals are still well extended enough and not overly dark or masked in the details while not being overly shouty. Male artists have a deeper tone to them. They're a little bit huskier and not as fully opened, clean, sweet sounding, or as powerful as something like the EPZ-P50, the RS5, or the Volume S. However, they're not nasally or congested, so it's still decent for vocals, but I wouldn't say this is a vocal powerhouse. It is enjoyable and works perfectly fine for metal, rock, and hip hop. Timbre wise, this is more natural than Harman IEMs like the Supermix 4, the Nova, the Chopin, because of the fuller sound and less shouty upper mids. It just sounds more musical, a little bit more natural, and less monitor and clinical like. However, when it comes to technical performance, the Supermix 4, the Nova, the Chopin, they're all gonna have slightly better, technical performance in the detail retrieval, the separation, and a small boost in the overall clarity. The difference isn't big enough where it warrants you to get the Supermix 4 over the Quatio just for the tech, but I would put this around the same level as the EW300, the Defiant, which means it's still solid in terms of the performance, but just not an IEM that I would consider to be crazy when it comes to value. Now, even though it's not market breaking, I would still say the price is still justified because of the tuning nozzles, which I'll talk about later, and it's also tuned well on top of the solid metal build quality, the nice cable, and the case. So in terms of the overall package, it is competitive. As for the gold nozzles or filters, if you're looking for a cleaner and more balanced sound, then these would be the better fit in that scenario. It's less bassy, just quantity wise, you get less bass. The separation is a bit cleaner, and there's less focus on the low end, which means you can hear the vocals and the other elements a little bit better. This makes the gold nozzles a great fit when it comes to indie, acoustics, ballads, slower stuff, and with the extra boost in the upper mids on top of the decreased low end, this makes it more vocal and mid-centric. And vocal wise, it is less male focused versus the black filter and more female oriented, as the artists, they just pop out more. It's cleaner, it has a slight bite to them, and you also just get more detail and clarity overall with a little bit more vocal contrast. And then as for these silver filters, if you want something in between warm, bassy, and balanced, then these will split the difference between the gold and black filters in terms of the amount of upper mids and low end that you get, which means you get a bit of both worlds. Now, scaling wise, all three tuning options are mid volume sets at around 65 to 75 dBs depending on the filters. So if you're looking for a super immersive blast your brains out kind of experience, then the Full Explore is still the king there for around $100. It just has a much tamer and relaxed upper mids playback, and also very good for rock, metal, and hip hop, but just the high volume version of the Quatios. But that aside, if I were to rank it, the black filters on the Quatio would scale the best because it just has the least energy, a warmer sound, a fuller low end, and after that it would be the silver filters, which has a little bit more energy and less low end. Then lastly, it would be the gold filters because it just has the most clarity, most detail, but it can get a bit shouty on more energetic genres like K-pop, J-pop, and it doesn't scale as well as the others. Although as long as you're not blasting these, they all sound pretty good at mid volume. Tip wise, I recommend something smoother like the Software Ultra Clears, or any tip that doesn't create peaks in the upper mids and treble, or something just with a wider bore like the Velvet to Venus Wides that opens up the sound more. Those would all work very well. Now, as for some comparisons versus the EW300 red nozzles, the Quatio with the black filters sound very similar from the low end to the upper mids, with a slight difference in the treble where the EW300 has a little bit more detail, a little bit sharper when it comes to the attack. Both are bassy all-rounders, but the Quatio just scales a little bit better, less energy in the upper mids. And overall, if you already have the EW300, then it's kind of redundant if you're buying the Quatios for like the hip-hop R&B library kind of sound. Then versus the gold filters, the EW300 Reds are bassier and less mid-range focused, less detailed in the vocals with slightly like worse separation and overall clarity compared to the gold filters. I would say for most people the Quatio is more versatile with better accessories, and you do get a bigger difference when it comes to the sound with the different filters. However, if you want a bassy all-rounder, then the EW300s are just, cheaper, and you can get them for around $60 to $70 on sale. But if you want like a more like all-rounder versatile set, then the Quatios would be a better set. Then versus the JUZEAR DEFIANT, which is another all-rounder, the Quatio with the gold filters also has that familiar kind of like clean sound, but just less V-shape, less sub-bass, less treble, and more balanced overall. Because the 15K on the DEFIANT can sometimes get a little bit sharp, a little bit peaky, whereas the Quatios just have a very nicely extended treble, pretty balanced, not as airy and energetic, but you don't get the peaks either. Now, the main advantage of the Quatios is that it also has the option to give you a more bassier listen with the black and silver filters as well, whereas the DEFIANT is obviously only one tuning. So again, in terms of versatility, the Quatio is a better pick if you just want more variety. Basically, if you're struggling to pick between the cleaner sound of the DEFIANT versus the bassier sound of the EW300, you want to listen to both of them, but you don't want to drop almost $200, then that's where the Quatio comes in with its multiple filters. Again, I wouldn't say the Quatio has the best value when it comes to performance at its price, because you can get both the EA500LM and the EM6L for cheaper and more technical. Those have a brighter tonality overall, more treble focus, versus the bassy or balanced sound depending on the filter on the Quatios. Because if you save up a little bit more, you can get the Super Mix 4 and the Chopin for around $150, and it is more technical than this. However, out of all these sets I compared the Quatio to in this video, none of them gives you that like flexibility while performing great across multiple genres, from rock and metal to indie and ballads to classical and R&B. For example, the EW300 might be just as good for hip hop and R&B, but it doesn't have the option to excel on metal, indie, and ballads. And then for the DEFIANT, it might be just as good, on pop and indie, but it doesn't have the same tuning for the metal and rock genres. And similarly, the Super Mix 4 might be more technical for the price, but it's also shoutier, thinner, less tuning options, and not as natural sounding as the Quatios. So that's where the main difference lies. The Quatio has that versatility if you do ever need it, but it still sounds very good for metal, rock, and hip hop at mid volume, and I do recommend giving these a shot. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope the review was helpful. I'm going to be doing a 618 sales guide soon, so stay tuned for that. And then the Q&A and giveaway video is after that, so stay tuned for that. We got lots coming. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see everyone in the next one.
Shout out to Roark's Cat, Dom Q, The Skull Scottus, B. Urak, Mystic Spoon Attack, Walker Standard, User, Patrick, Polly J, Mr. Gabrielas, Giseng Young, Christopher Jackson, Henry Claudia, Son of a Horse, Obi, Wizard, Frickalicious, Ricardo, Tapas Art, Shin Bakle, Choconorris, FKSRG, Treble Will Extended, Cousin Fat Fat, O'Reilly, Julius, Dead Riddle, Bilha, Tomat, Ardmore, 777ZK, Jasper, Nicholas, Gerbliss, Parham, Contain Guava Juice Gains, Addy, Brandon, Syracuse, Wayu, Harder, Michael, Jacob, and Danor. Thank you guys so much.